There's a lot of talk about the future of scheduling within the SEC. Who should Auburn want to play?
Well, Zach, I actually just finished crushing some chicken farm, and I am freaking ready to rock and roll.
You are Locked On Auburn, your daily podcast on the Auburn Tigers. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Yes, welcome on into Locked On Auburn, your daily Auburn Tigers podcast. I'm your host, Zac Blackerby, and thank you so much for making Locked On Auburn your first listen every single day. Happy War Rapport Wednesday. Mike G of the War Rapport, our guest as he is almost every single Wednesday, this special day of the week. Mike G, there's been all this talk, right, about Texas and Oklahoma coming into the SEC and what it means, there's a million different ways that it impacts everything. But as far as the scheduling goes, the year-to-year scheduling, it seems to have sparked a conversation of like, okay, there's so many teams from the East and the West, especially like with A&M and Missouri coming in, but they've only played each other like one time. It's crazy. So what do you think about all this? I mean, specifically with the pods system that's being proposed, right? Where it's like this 3+5 is kind of something we're seeing a lot of, 3+6 if they want to add an extra SEC game. Ross Dellinger took a stab at it, right? What some of these permanent every year opponents would look like throughout the SEC. So every team in the conference would get 3. And he has Auburn playing Alabama, Georgia, and Vanderbilt every year. What are your thoughts on those 3 potential rivalries?
That feels like kind of an easy default because you don't want to destroy the traditional rivalries between Alabama, Auburn, and Georgia. So I could see why people would put us together like that. That's really tough for Auburn. It almost feels like you just throw Vanderbilt in there just to not make it so brutal. So, hey, here's your cupcake.
The Vandy ad is almost like a pity thing, right? Like, all right, you got Bama and Georgia. Like, we can't give them somebody else competent, so let's just throw in Vanderbilt. That's really what it kind of felt like,
Yeah, can you imagine, like, putting LSU in that group? So I've seen this talked about a couple different ways. You have the 3-6 model, right? 3 permanent rivals, and then 6 rotating, and then a lot of people are talking about the one model where it's 1 and then the rest of them rotate. It's going to be really interesting to see how they do this, because what you're seeing in college football now is you're seeing that conferences are positioning to make sure that they are well positioned to get a team, at least one team, into the playoff. The Pac has eliminated divisions altogether because too many times their weak divisions winner pulls something off in the Pac-12 championship, wins the Pac, and then that team has no shot at going to the playoff, right?
Well, and the Big Ten's kind of in the same boat too, right? Because like it would come down to the game, like whoever wins between Ohio State and Michigan, the winner goes to the Big Ten championship. And it's like, why would you do that? Like, why would you set yourself up that way? And so I think you nailed it. As far as conferences wanting representation in the big dance when it matters the most, and especially as, we're all anticipating an eventual expansion throughout the college football playoff. You want, when you talk about maybe 12 teams and you're the SEC, it's like, yeah, we could get 4 teams in there if we do this right. So I get it. I totally get it.
Everything is predicated on does this model allow us to get guys into the playoffs, to get teams into the playoffs? So the SEC has been dominating every model of this since the BCS, the inception of the BCS. We had a string of 8 straight years with a team in or a champion, and then the playoff created a little bit more parity there, but for the most part, it was still Alabama winning a bunch of championships, and then your occasional Ohio State or a team like that winning it all. And what this model is going to do is you want to preserve traditional rivalries in the SEC. The SEC, it's the South, man. Like, tradition matters. And so this new model can't completely destroy that. But you also have to fit these new teams in and start creating new traditions. So do Oklahoma and Texas become, again, traditional geographical rivals again in this new system? I've seen a lot of pods where you put those 2 teams back together, essentially, and then do Texas and Texas A&M play each other every year? I saw some drama around that where
I don't think the Aggies want that, right?
I think that the Aggies just don't want anything to do with Oklahoma, with Texas in general. I think that's why they left the Big 12.
It's hilarious.
Yeah, I love the level of petty, Zach, is my level of petty. I love this level of petty. They said, we're going to pay.
It's petty, but like with billions of dollars being involved, and Texas is like, we need that. We need that. And the SEC is like, we'll take you too, because that's just going to help us, and everyone benefits. Everyone wins except for Texas A&M. But
yeah,
whatever. And don't call Jimbo out for it, or he's going to hold a press conference and try to roast you. But where do you sit on this? Right. Well, actually, okay, I want to have two different conversations here.
Okay.
The first one, I want to know what you would rather see. Right. And then after that, assuming we do the pods thing, which three teams would you like to see Auburn play every year? So first things first, do you like the pod situation, or do you like the 1+7? So where Auburn would get to pick, I assume they would pick Alabama. And then all the other SEC games are rotating every single year. That's kind of where I'm at.
That's where I'm at.
You like the idea of the pods, and then you rotate 5 or 6, depending if they choose to add another SEC game or not.
I'm with you. I'm with the 1+ model. The only team I think Auburn needs to play every year is Alabama. That game has to be preserved for the sake of college football in general. It's just so good for college football.
Sure.
Other than that, I think that Auburn consistently has a crappy draw in terms of schedule, and I think that this new system potentially fixes that, where we may have a more favorable schedule some years if you rotate out the other teams. And it gets a lot of teams in the SEC West potentially off of that murderer's row rotation, where when you look at top 10 schedules in the country every year, there's like 6 to 8 SEC teams in there, and like most of them are SEC West teams. So maybe a little less self-cannibalism in conference in the 1+ model. I think if you do the pods of 4, it's worse. It may be worse. So yeah, I'm with you. I've had my questions about this. I think ultimately when it comes to the SEC, I want the SEC championship game to still mean something. And I think the 2 best winning percentages need to be in that game. So whatever.
Did you see the SEC's wanting to do its own playoff, that they're discussing that?
I did.
Top 4, like that would be awesome. I would love. I don't know if it's necessarily like good for the entire sport, but selfishly, I would love all of that.
Yeah, I mean, you're adding Oklahoma and Texas to the conference. Why not give those teams more opportunities to play each other? And then at the end of it, the top 2 teams standing still have a good chance of getting in that playoff. So in a year where Alabama dominates, or, maybe LSU dominates, and we've seen that kind of rotate through the conference over the years, we haven't really had a problem with having, our teams are deserving. Like, when was the last team from the SEC that got into the playoffs that you could say wasn't deserving of being in the playoffs? But I think it would create some more excitement. It possibly gives us a couple more games to talk about. And as long as player health is considered in that model, because football is really hard on the body. So whenever you talk about playing extra games, that's more opportunities for injuries and things to go wrong. So that if you get all your star players hurt before the playoffs, it doesn't help you win it all. But
yeah, to me, I think that lost some of its argument, or at least some of its weight in an argument, when the SEC, like for years, they were like, we can't add any more conference games. It's too physical. It's too much. Mm-hmm. Then COVID year happened, and it's like, well, all you did was play 10 conference games and everybody was okay. So like, I don't know if I necessarily buy that. But we'll have to wait and see what would happen there. But yeah, that'd be totally fun. Like, just the top 4 overall performing teams in the SEC are seeded 1 through 4 for a chance to win the SEC championship. Like that'd be a blast. That would be so fun.
Yeah. I don't know, man. Like, I just don't think, I'm not sure if I agree on the, like, I'm not sure everybody was okay in that 10 game model. We skipped the spring, right? So there was a bunch of just preparation that a lot of people missed.
True.
I think that coaches scaled a lot of things. They dumbed a lot of things down for that season. Mm-hmm. And, when you look at, we had games canceled, like there was a lot like that went on that season. But ultimately, player health. I think player health has to be considered when you look at the pro model. Even the pros, they're against adding more games. They just feel like, hey, cut out some of these meaningless preseason games. The preseason became meaningless because players don't want to go out there and get hurt. The season is already so brutal on the body, and college athletes can only spend so much time training. They can't train like pro athletes. They don't have the time. They have class obligations. Now they have NIL obligations. There's only so much time you could spend preparing your body for a brutal schedule like that. And I mean, think about it. Even last year, you get to the national title game, and Alabama's missing their best receiver through attrition, through injury. It's tough, playing those extra games can be tough. So I really just hope, that we create a model where it creates max competition. We preserve traditional rivalries, and it gives our conference a chance to get two teams in the playoff every year. Like, selfishly, I want to see that. I want to see, a lot of people didn't enjoy Georgia, Alabama playing for the national title, but I kind of like watching that. The two best teams in our conference are duking it out at the end of the year.
Both games were fun to watch. There's no question about it. All right, so if Auburn, or I guess if the SEC does do the thing where you get 3 protected games, which are the 3 for Auburn? What makes the most sense? We'll talk about that in just a moment. Today's show brought to you by our friends at RockAuto.com. With the ever-increasing numbers of makes and models, it's impossible for your local chain auto parts store to give all the parts you need. So when you go to these places, they're going to do the same thing you could do by just going to RockAuto.com. They're going to order a part from their warehouse. They're going to have less of a selection than you would have if you just took out your phone and went to RockAuto.com. And you don't have to drive anywhere. It'll go right to your door. So you can save time and money when using Rock Auto. Rock Auto is a family business. They've been serving do-it-yourselfers for over 20 years. Go to RockAuto.com right now and see all the parts available for your car, truck, or SUV. You're right, Locked On Auburn in their How Did You Hear About Us box, so they know that we sent you. Amazing selection, reliable low prices, and all the parts your car will ever need. That is at RockAuto.com. All right, Mike G, if Auburn could have 3 protected opponents every year, Ross Delta with SI took a stab at all of them. He had Auburn having Alabama, Georgia, and Vanderbilt. I think it's a good start. My personal preference in this would be Alabama, LSU, and Vanderbilt.
LSU's on my list.
Okay.
That game has produced. Game's just too good, man. Even when it's bad, it's good. I like protecting LSU as an opponent. And, again, the third one has to just add us some relief. So I'm with you on that one. That's a very boring answer, but I agree. I think Alabama, LSU, and then somebody who sucks in that third spot. So if it's Vandy, I feel like that spot rotates between Vandy. Maybe Kentucky's kind of on the ups right now, but a lot of times they're terrible. Who else in the SEC is terrible? The bottom of the league generally has been Vandy,
Missouri.
Kentucky, Missouri
in there.
Yeah, like, so give me one of those teams. But even with Missouri, you're talking about since the inception of the new SEC where they joined, they played in an SEC title game, and they played Auburn. So they every once in a while they find like a really good quarterback. The SEC is just so tough, man. Yeah, give me Vandy. Vandy is definitely it. That's the one team we can count on to boost our graduation.
That's right.
Boost our graduation rates and be terrible at football.
No, I'm there with you though, because I think Auburn should get a nod if they're going to be a team that plays Alabama every year. They should get that nod. And I think LSU is going to kind of be expected to be a top 3rd team as well, because Ross had Alabama. The teams playing Alabama is Tennessee and LSU, Auburn, Tennessee, and LSU, and they've got LSU playing Ole Miss, A&M, and Alabama. That's tough. That could be potentially tough. And then Tennessee is Vandy, Alabama, and South Carolina. So Tennessee's kind of in the same boat, right? Like the lesser opponents there. So, yeah, I mean, I think it makes sense. It's also interesting, like, if you go forward with this rule where you have 3 protected matchups every single year, do you revisit it every certain amount of years? Or is this it for, the next 20 years of the SEC? I think that's an interesting
I think this should be something that should be able to be revisited every other year. Honestly, you give yourself 2 years to figure out what that schedule looks like. But every other year, they should be able to relook at this and say, because if it's not working, you don't want to be stuck with it for 5 to 10 years, man. Like, that doesn't make any sense. It's too easy 2 years out to plan a schedule, right? That allows for you to schedule your non-conference, got people that you want to schedule, and then rotate in conference. They should be able to accomplish that 2 years out.
I'm there with you, man. I'm there with you. So awesome. All right. I want to continue the conversation about quarterbacks. We had this conversation a little bit with Charlie 5 yesterday. I want to get Mike G's thoughts on Auburn's quarterback situation and the narrative around them. But first things first, I want to tell you about our friends at BetOnline. If you tuned into yesterday's show, you heard us talk about BetOnline. They put out all of the win totals for Power 5 schools earlier this week. Auburn's over-under is 5.5. So, had a lot of people reach out after that episode went up saying, quickest $100 I've ever put down. Highly encourage you to do that. Go to BetOnline's website and you can see Auburn's line as well as a ton of other schools there. Get in on the action. BetOnline, where the game starts. Mike G, there's a conversation happening amongst Auburn fans, right? And I'm hearing it all the time. I'm sure you are too. And it goes something like, if Auburn's quarterback production can just get a little bit better, it just gets a little bit better, Auburn wins more of their close games from a year ago. And I'm like, yeah, I'm cool with that hypothesis. Like, I'm cool with that statement. I'm not cool with how, like, people are just throwing out there as like, that's a likely thing. That you lose Bo Nix last year, who was the vast majority of the offense. He was a huge part of the offense before he got injured, of course. And just the assumption that whoever wins the job, whether it's Zach Calzada, which you and I think will probably be him, TJ Finley or Robbie Ashford, whoever it is, there's just this assumption that whoever it is going to be a hair above Bo Nix from last season. And I don't think that's entirely fair to say.
I don't know if fair is the right word. I will tell you that I think that there was a lot of talk last year about how other aspects of the team affected the quarterback, but a lot of people did not talk about how the quarterback affected other aspects of the team. So what do we know? Statistically, we had the 4th best pass blocking line in our league last year. We had a guy, Zach Calzada, that won more games than we did playing behind, statistically, a bottom 2 pass blocking line in our league.
Where do you think Auburn's, and it's impossible to answer this, but where do you think Auburn's offensive line would have graded as far as sacks allowed and pressures allowed and things like that if they had a less mobile quarterback back there?
It's hard to say, right? Because it's more than just about running.
It's still a fun thing to talk about.
Yeah, it's hard to say because it's not just about being mobile. It's about how long you hold on to the ball, how quickly a quarterback reads the field. There's a lot of stuff that goes. An argument that I hear a lot is that Bo didn't get sacked a lot because we didn't have a lot of sacks because he escaped pressure. But a lot of those times where he escaped pressure, it was unnecessary. The pressure wasn't there. Like, Zach, the pressure wasn't there as much as people thought it was because we had the 4th best pass blocking line in our league. Those advanced statistics account for things like QB scrambles. So you can't just say Bo ran out of the pocket.
But it's a distance thing, right? Like, it's a distance thing.
We know exactly how many plays that was. Those are statistics that they keep. When you go back and you look at it, at the end of the day,
they're not weighted the same though. Like, when you're grading these things, like, they're not weighted the same. Like, when they score that somebody leaves the pocket, it's not going to be charted, and it's not going to be likely as charted as allowing a pressure. That's a Pro Football Focus thing. I mean, there's no perfect way to score it.
I think it is. I think it is, though. I think that when a QB leaves the pocket, right, what they're breaking down why the QB left the pocket. Did he leave on his own? That's not a QB pressure. If he had to, reasonably, and that's what advanced statistics are. They take all those things into account to say, hey, this was a QB pressure, or was it the same way that they look at factors on drops, right? It's all subjective. Think about last year. Everybody said we had 16 drops versus Georgia. We didn't have 16 drops versus Georgia because all people saw was the ball get to the wide receiver and then not be caught. But
the ball was throwing it too hard, right?
Well, the people who know what they're doing, right, and keep those advanced statistics, the scouts, they see, hey, there were other factors in why that ball wasn't caught. So is it more on the receiver, or there are enough other external factors about why that ball doesn't caught that doesn't get recorded as a drop? There's a guy on Twitter that keeps stats, the Stat Tiger, I think it's called, or something.
That cat.
Yeah, he had Auburn with like 14 more drops than Pro Football Focus had. And I'm like, how is this guy recording drops? There's no nuance to his numbers. Obviously, that's the only way that you come up with that number. And I don't think he had Kobe Hudson with 15 drops last year. And I'll try to explain to people. I'm like, do you understand how crazy that number is? 15 drops. There's no way you stay on the field.
That's a lot.
If you had 15 drops. I don't care if he was our best wide receiver. I don't care what else he did. If he dropped the ball truly 15 times, he wouldn't have been in the lineup. He'd have been on the bench. So again, when you're looking, people are saying, going back to quarterback, because that's what we're talking about, right? It is Auburn a better team with slightly better quarterback play? And the answer is yes, because a lot of the pieces are the same.
That's not what we're talking about, though. We're talking about, is it easy? Is it a lazy take to just assume that Auburn's quarterback position will be a little bit better from a year ago?
Yeah,
that's the narrative here.
Yeah, I don't think you can assume anything. I think making assumptions, but is it reasonable? I think is the question. The question is it reasonable to say that we could get better production out of the quarterback position than we did last year? I think it is reasonable to say that because of how much time our quarterback last year had to play quarterback from the pocket and produced great games. And then the lows were still really low. I don't even think that we need, honestly, Zach, here's where I'm at. Okay. I think I'm not so sure it's about the ceiling. We don't need a guy. Georgia has proven this, right? We don't need a guy to go out there and win the Heisman every game. What you need is you need a guy who will go out there sometimes and just not lose the game for you. Right. You need a guy who can go out there and not have a Georgia State or Texas A&M or South Carolina type game last year.
Yeah, sure.
Right. And that's both quarterbacks I'm talking about. So just bad performances that keep your team from having a chance to win the game. That's all I'm talking about. I think that all three quarterbacks that we have on our roster have that potential. The question is, will they? I don't think you can assume, but in year two of this system, with a guy like TJ Finley, who's been through it 1 year, and another guy in Zach Calzada, who's done it in the SEC. When you look at his numbers, he was only 55% completion percentage, but he played behind literally the only O-line that was worse than his last year was Bama's. They were terrible. And they graduated their entire offensive line right before he came in. So Kellen Mond played behind the most experienced line in the SEC. And then Zach Calzada came in behind the most inexperienced line in the SEC. I don't care how good their recruiting classes were. There was no experience on that line. It showed. And what I saw a guy who hung in the pocket and delivered passes enough to win them some really, really big games. And they had an average season, but there were, I don't know. I think that if he had our pass blocking last year, he'd had a much better season. So the receivers play better when the quarterback is more accurate. I think that can be him. I think it could be any of the quarterbacks on our roster. It's a toss. It's a coin flip. I mean, you have to be skeptical about what you haven't seen. The sample size at Auburn is 0. So I understand people's hesitation to say, I'm not sure if we're going to get better because historically we just haven't seen it. It comes to Auburn like once every 4 years, it feels like. Cam Newton, 3-4 years later, Nick Marshall, 3-4 years later, Jarrett Stidham. Like our fans are just not used to seeing that. So I understand the hesitation to assume that it's going to be better. But is it reasonable is the better question to think that we could get better quarterback play than we had last year. And I think it is reasonable, especially in year 2. And I'll tell you, we're in an interview series right now with a lot of the players. We interviewed Coach Harsin last week.
Right.
Hearing about how things are going, seeing the work that they're putting in, it's really hard to root against them, man. Like, it is. And this is a homer take. 100% this is a homer take.
That's fine.
So,
there's nothing wrong with that.
Yeah, let me just
I mean, if you're listening to this, for the most part, there is a chunk of the fan base that likes to hate on Auburn, even though they're Auburn fans. But for the most part, people listening to an Auburn show in May, they're they're wanting Auburn to do well.
Yeah,
but
this was
still interesting, like that it's gotten to the point where, like, when you sprinkle positivity, it's like 7 wins.
Yeah, I'll tell you what, but I think that's reasonable in year 2 for a second-year coach in the SEC. If you're building a program, I think it's reasonable. I think it's reasonable to win 7 games and still have hope for the next season. There are going to be some disappointing losses next season. Zach, there are going to be some disappointing losses next season. There are going to be some seasons where we're all sitting here scratching our heads like, man, we could have won that. But
let's go through the second-year coaches in the conference.
All right, let's do this.
So
we did this on our show, by the way.
So Vandy is projected 2.5 wins.
Mm-hmm.
And then South Carolina is projected 6.5 wins. Is that it?
Those are all the second-year coaches?
I think, was it just 3? Or is there a 4th one? I'm trying to look and see who it would have been.
It would have been a new coach last year.
Bama, Arkansas, Florida, Georgia, Kentucky, LSU.
No, I think you're right. That's it. Everybody else has been in place.
Mississippi State and Lane Kiffin, this is their 3rd year, right?
Right, correct.
Missouri. Tennessee with Heupel. They're projected 7.5. This is Heupel's 2nd year, right?
Yes, correct.
Yeah. So Tennessee and South Carolina are both expected to do more this year per Vegas.
Mm-hmm.
Their schedules are easier.
And look at Tennessee, man. Like, look what they had to go through last year just to find some positive momentum going in. The guy they started at quarterback is that game 1 is not the guy who finished.
Right.
They had to find a guy during the season. And it turned out, much to some people's shock, that the guy who won the job in the spring wasn't the best guy on the roster. I don't know why our fans have so much problem with that concept, that sometimes the guy that wins the job is not the best guy. It's just, they're making the coaches have tough decisions to make when they're.
Wait, what are you saying there, though? Are you saying that Bo Nix wasn't the best quarterback on the roster last year?
No. I'm saying that it's possible that whoever wins the job may or may not be the guy still, right? We don't have to be completely married to the guy who wins the job. And I think that our quarterback room overall is in better shape than it was last year.
Yeah, but if Harsin misses and he doesn't nail the right guy, and you lose to Penn State and LSU, like it's over. Like, you have to correct Auburn is over.
Yeah, you have to correct course quickly. That's where I'm at. Like, if you start, whoever you start, if he's not the guy, you have to figure it out before the season comes off the rails. And that's what those first 5 games are for. So that doesn't mean, and what I mean by that is.
But if you wait 5 games, Mike G, it's over. It's too late.
Well, if you wait 5 games, you should know what you have. That's the assumption. The assumption is by game 5, we have the guy. My thing is that you can look at a team and a quarterback, Zach, in a win and say, we need to make a change. You have that opportunity the first 2 games where, the wheels really have to come off the wagon for us to lose. But if we're ineffective at that position and we still win, you can still make a change. And I think that has been.
That's such a tough thing to see, but you're totally right.
The better coaches can do it. Mm-hmm. If our coach is worth the money that we're paying him, $5 million, he should be able to look at a win and say, you know what, we didn't get it done. We got to make a change here. Or we're not, or if we play like that versus Penn State, we're going to lose. Yeah. So, that's the decision, the hard decision that the coaches have to make. You don't have to wait until we lose everything to make the change. And that's where I felt that was my frustration with last year. In hindsight, I have to admit, I think they did the best that they could. I think the right decisions
I think
were
it's
made.
pretty clear Bo Nix was the best quarterback on the roster last year.
Yeah, and for a lot of reasons. the best quarterback on this roster. I don't think it's saying a bunch, but you brought a guy in who did not have a spring with the team. And we weren't set up well, and then you had a true freshman behind him who there were some other problems that we found out later, and now he's not on the roster.
Right.
So no, that's not to say that he was so great. That's just to say we didn't have a lot of options, but that has been Auburn traditionally at quarterback over the last 10 years. The second guy, right?
Maybe. That doesn't mean anything pre-Harsin doesn't really matter, right?
Yeah. Well, I'm just saying, I'm talking about in terms of fan perspective, right? Like, we're trying to break that mentality that this one guy is it, and there's no way that the guy behind him, like, what I hate is the whole idea that, the backup quarterback is always the most popular guy on campus. And I'm just like, I hate that. I hate that because coaches are human, man, and they make mistakes as well too. And sometimes there's no way to evaluate a guy until you put him in a game and see how he reacts. That's
also not true. Like, no one cared who the backup was with Cam. Nobody cared who the
because he was good.
Yeah,
that's my point. That's my point.
If you have a good quarterback, they're not worried about that. And like, there were people that were worried about the backup quarterback with Nick Marshall, but that was just dumb. Like, that was a bad take, and I told you that then. And like, they shouldn't have felt that way when Stidham was here either, but they did because they were enamored with, a guy who's now an NFL quarterback. So I get it, but good stuff as always, Mike G. How can people find you, hear you, watch you, support you, all that good stuff?
Listen, go on over to YouTube. We're doing an interview series right now where we're interviewing a lot of players, and we have one with Coach Harsin that's live now for our members. We'll release that later for everybody. He even did a film review with us. So Coach Harsin sat down and broke down some quarterback film with us. Liked what I saw and heard from him. Lots of great stuff at the War Report. Go check us out.
Yes, check it all out. That is Mike G with the War Report. Be sure to tune in to our show tomorrow. SI's John Garcia. We'll talk all things Auburn Cruton. You can follow me on Twitter at Zac Blackerby and read all of my written work at auburndaily.com. We'll see you tomorrow. This has been Locked On Auburn.